And lastly, for this session, we have a presentation showing how Podimo has developed a novel tech on podcast search on the platform, creating an entirely new user experience. Please welcome Director of AI at Podimo and PhD in Computer Science, Benjamin Belmudez, Biering. Welcome.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little story about how we are leveraging generative AI to enhance the search of podcasts and audiobooks. So maybe just to start, a little word about Podimo. Who is Podimo? It's a startup that was born in Copenhagen in 2019. And since then, we have expanded to 6 other markets, also in Latin America, primarily in Europe. And we have been the fastest growing audio entertainment subscription service for the past couple of years. So for those of you who are familiar with podcasts, you know that it's not super easy to find a new podcast to listen to. And when you look at some reviews and some statistics, you can see that the primary way people discover new podcasts is by asking friends, family, looking on social media, but it's more like word of mouth. They don't necessarily use podcast apps. It's only in position 4. And so for us, that clearly represents an opportunity to make it more efficient and more appealing for people to find podcasts on our app. Yes. So at the moment, we have primarily 2 discovery modes. Either you can browse our catalog, so you have some collections, playlists, galleries. Some of them are AI generated. Some others are manually created, so editorial. Most of the time, they are based on the user taste and preferences, but some of them can also be generic, right? So it's like a discovery space where you can just spend time and scroll. It was quite Netflix-like with a lot of galleries, right? And then you can use search. But the question is, can you really use search for discovery purposes, right? So we looked at the data, and what we realized is that our users using search, they already know what they're looking for. How do we know that? It's because they only type for author names, titles of podcasts, or titles of episodes. So it means that they already know what they want to listen to. They don't use search for discovery purposes. Another thing to take into account is that, of course, we don't want to serve outdated content to our users. So we have the popularity information in the search engine, but that tends to bias the results towards popularity. And so maybe some piece of content which might be more relevant, they get downranked. And finally, there is very little personalization in the search, meaning that 2 users typing the same query will get the same search results, right? So it will be like a little bit more suboptimal compared to a situation where we can take the browsing history into account, listening history, previous searches, such kind of like personal data points, so to speak. That's why we have experimented with different versions of our search engine. We started with classical machine learning. It's called learning to rank. This one is basically to look at what do people consume, what do they listen to when they type a specific query. And we have trained a ranker to learn this mapping and this ranking. Right? So when a user makes a search, results get re-ranked so that the best performing content gets placed on top. So that's classical machine learning. But then we thought, okay, actually, if you really think about it, because users already know what they want to look for, if we do that, we just make it faster for them to find what they already know they want to listen to. So it's not super interesting. So okay, let's maybe try to capture the intent of the users, like what do they really want to listen to, and try to find the best matching content. So that's semantic search. And then we thought, okay, let's go one step further and try kind of a new way. I mean, of course, conversational search is not new, but it's new in the context of searching for podcasts. So today I'm going to focus primarily on semantic search and conversational search. let's start with semantic search. So I'm going to try to explain it. I hope you guys will understand. It's not too complicated. This beautiful cube represents semantic space, and it's a space where we encode the meaning of words and sentences. So in that space, we can place, different podcasts, but we can also place a query. Right? So everything that has text, you can plot it, encode the meaning, and basically in that space, items which are close to each other will be close in meaning as well. So for example, a query like investing will be quite close to podcasts about traders, Wall Street, but will be further away from soccer and comedy podcasts, right? So semantic search basically boils down to finding the items which are closest to each other. But how did we implement that? It was a two-step operation. Step number one, find a model that someone else has already pre-trained. So that was super easy. We just went on Hugging Face and selected a model. Of course, it had to be multilingual because, as I said, we are in 7 different markets, so we have many different languages. So we just want one model to govern them all. We don't want to have many different models to maintain. Second task was to fine-tune. We just heard about that. And the fine-tuning dataset was basically a collection of semantic queries. So what we would imagine people would type if they were looking for to discover on a new topic, and then associated relevant documents. But we had to do a little bit of data cleaning before we could get started, because when we looked at the data to see if it was clean enough to be used, we realized that the description of our podcast was rather short and sometimes uninformative. Her God, God, that's one of our biggest Danish podcasts. The description takes 1 sentence or 2, but it's very tiny, right? So you don't really know what the podcast is about. So what we did to fix that, we took the description of all the episodes, and then we used a generative model to combine them into one informative, like somewhat longer description, right? And then we could use that to represent the content. Second step was to take this description, and from this description derive some potential semantic queries. So for example, for a podcast like Fries Meets Guys, it's basically 2 girls talking about relationships, life, sex, what have you. Themes like gender and discussion, masculinity, so that fits into the podcast, right? So we generated around 326,000 query description pairs, but not just for podcasts. We did it for podcast episodes, and audiobooks, and potentially we can extend it to any kind of format we want. So we fine-tuned the model, and then when we looked at the results, we were super pleased, because now when our users search for something like cryptocurrency, you can see podcasts about blockchain, Bitcoin. So it's not an exact keyword match, but it gets the concept, right, of what the people want to listen to. Same thing with something calm. Find something about meditation, sleeping. You get the gist. And because I'm a data scientist, I like numbers and graphs and that thing. So just to prove my point that it works, NDCG score, it's a classic performance measure in search. It measures kind of like the relevance and accuracy. A score of 1 is a perfect list of search results, where the first element is really the thing that you want to listen to. And we went from 61% to 91%. So that we were extremely pleased about that. So now let's talk about conversational search. I should mention that, of course, us updating our search engine in the background and then serving it in the app, that wouldn't have moved the needle that much, because then people would still be searching for titles of podcasts and names of authors and so forth. They would not start typing topical searches or semantic searches. So we thought, okay, let's build something else so that people understand that this is a new paradigm, right? And so why did we choose that? Because, well, people are already, it feels natural and familiar to converse with a chat. It's a place where we can also, we have the opportunity to grasp the intent of the users, like what do they want to do? And finally, we can use whatever context we want, whatever information about the users we want, we can personalize it as we see fit. And what we did was to basically use different LLMs, such as GPT-4, Gemini, as a kind of like a natural language understanding layer. So we use these models to understand what the users are typing, pass the information, and then formulate a response. Right? They're really good at doing that. And just to exemplify, when our users started to use conversational search, we could clearly see that, they got the point. Like they were now searching find a podcast about Morocco, about hackers, darknet. Don't know, search for that. American thriller. So like they were way broader in the types of searches, right? Yes, and so if we take the exact same group of users and we compare the usage of the tool between classical search and conversational search, we can see that before they were only doing typing kind of exact match type of queries, and when they started using conversational search, they started to search by topics. So how did we prototype that? We used LangChain, which is a quite popular framework for building applications powered by LLMs, and then we connected it to our search engine, to like our semantic search, our different recommendation databases, and other tools, right? So it goes like this. A user types, I'm looking for a podcast about elections in Denmark. Step number 1, figuring out what does the user want, right? They can have different intents. Could be searching for something specific. Could be, oh, I really like this podcast. I want to find a podcast that is very similar. It could be give me personal recommendations about X and Y. Could be just chit-chatting like they would do in ChatGPT. Could be clarification if something is, not clear. Or also we wanted to catch, even though it was designed as a POC, we still, wanted to catch malicious intent. So then the large language model catches that the query is election in DK, and that the type of media it should return is a podcast. So then it searches in the database, and then finds a podcast about elections in Denmark, and then formulates a response. Pretty straightforward. Yes, and again, if we compare the same group of users, looking at and searching for podcasts on the discovery screen, and searching for podcasts in the conversational search part of the app, widely different conversion rates. Of course, you can argue that we're comparing apples and bananas. That's true, but it's still pretty convincing results. What's next? So we released the conversational search as kind of an experiment. We had it run for a full quarter on 20% of our user base. Now we have paused it. How are we going to release that? I mentioned that we are using GPT-4 and Gemini. They're very expensive. If we have, I cannot tell you the number of users, but we have a lot of users that do a lot of searches. If we make a request to ChatGPT every single time, it's not very cost effective. So we thought that maybe we could go the assistant way. So try to be a little bit more goal-oriented, capture the main tasks that the user are interested in, and then try to guide and inspire them into discovering what they're truly looking for. Thank you.
Thank you, Benjamin. This conversational interface with search, many people are talking about this as being the future. Do you agree? Would this be massive or the only thing we interact with?
So conversation as an interface, maybe, I don't know.
Chat.
But as we mentioned before, agents, is really something that is gaining speed, and you can see the conversational search also as some type of agents, because it's a system that understands you and can perform actions in the background and then get back to you and ask for more information. So that's a form of agent, right? And this is what's getting speed at the moment. So I personally do believe in it, yeah.
And how important is discovering new podcasts with this type of chat-based search to the user experience at Podimo now?
It's very important.
Yeah.
It's extremely important because a lot of our users, they come to Podimo because of that one podcast they've heard about. And in that sense, their behavior is a little bit the same than on any other content platform. You go to HBO to watch Game of Thrones, and then when you're done with it, what should I do there, right? And so we face the same problem. So our challenge is that when we get users, to make them discover kind of our universe and say, hey, you listen to that podcast, but maybe that one, could also really be a very good fit for you. So it's a very important issue. Yeah.
And have you noticed any kind of different patterns in how people subscribe to and listen to podcasts with this new feature?
Not really, because it was running for 2-3 months.
Yeah.
So it was enough to prove that it was a viable concept and that it was successful. But yeah.
Yeah. And since I'm a podcast host, how can I kind of ensure that people will listen to my podcast with this?
Just come to me and I'll tweak the system.
Good to hear. Anyone in the audience who would like to ask a question? Yes, we have one over here. Would you like to? That's a long way. Benjamin, I think that's you. Would you like a hand mic?
I think it's amazing.
Thank you so much for a really inspiring presentation. And would you say that this, setting up the conversational search was a very complicated? It looks so smooth, but how hard was it actually to do it? And where did you start, kind of?
Well, what I presented is, of course, a simplified version of what happened. It's a pretty smoothed out, I would say, because it was quite uncharted territories. Additionally, LangChain, yes, it is a very popular platform, but it's also, the documentation is not good. You have to figure out a lot of things by yourself. So it was a lot of fighting behind the scenes. That being said, because we used, ChatGPT or all of these LLMs, out of the box, we didn't have to fine-tune our own LLM. That simplified a lot of things. So actually, we just made it happen in a couple of months. So it wasn't that hard to implement.
All right, we have another question. Oh, we have a few down here. Could we maybe hop? Anyone ready to catch? Okay. I think Sarah, this is the rugby version of Catchbox.
Okay, are you ready?
Yeah, perfect.
Hi, thank you for a really nice talk. I was wondering about the your custom model. You got the boost in performance from 61% to 91% or whatever it was. What the baseline was there, and these embedding models have been rapidly improving. On Hugging Face, there's improvements all the time in multilingual embedding models, and then you've got OpenAI's embedding models, and I'm wondering what the baseline was, and if this is, if it's how you feel about those developments, and basically.
Okay, so if I understand the question, you were talking about the slides with the 61 to 91%?
Yeah, that's correct. I was curious what the baseline was there. Which
okay, so was. It was just to compare the NDCG score between using classical search on semantic search. Queries and using semantic search on semantic queries.
Oh, right, okay. Yeah.
But just to say one word about embeddings, yes, of course, you can use all the recent and modern LLMs to compute these embeddings out of the box. That being said, there is always a question of cost. So maybe you want to use quite a lightweight model because it's going to run a lot on your infrastructure. So it's always a performance cost balance. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, we have 2 questions over here in front of the pillar. Could maybe someone help it on the way? Oh, here it goes. Yeah. Okay, Sophie, then it's you first.
All
and
right.
then-
Sorry for taking the word again. I'd love to go back to what Agnes was talking about in the introduction, responsible media. And I read an article with you in Media Watch, I think maybe a year ago, that was mentioning this semantic search, right? And focusing on diversity in listening.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, what are your thoughts on how to move away from the Spotify core and like moving people to a certain sort of way in what they listen to and try to be more responsible somehow and take a lead on that? What is your take on that at Podimo? Are you trying to do that in a different way?
Well,
Leading question.
That's a different
You
question.
should. You should.
It's a difficult question. We are not irresponsible because I feel that podcasts are not like super dangerous goods. I personally don't enjoy the way Spotify does it because they have a very TikTok-like approach where they try to find one item and then blow it up on the screen and see if you like it, and then if you don't, you swipe up. So that's why we want to use these agents, try to figure out where are you on your journey, try to be contextual, like if you're on your daily commute, maybe we try to recommend you what you're usually listening to. Besides, like in our we have different recommender engines, and we try to inject diversity. It's actually one of our goals to do that. So to not keep people in like always listening to the top 100 podcasts because they're popular, then they get more recommended
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'll
Okay.
just.
We have a last question just in front of you. Yeah.
Hi. So one question on the conversational part. So how did you utilize chat history and the dialogue between the user and the system? And did you have any learnings on, was there any dialogue, or was it more like, Forbes or Times, like this one question, one answer kind of thing? So two.
Yeah. The average conversation length was between 3 and 4 turns. So it was not just a question answer. There was like a little bit. And if I'm not sure I don't want to be imprecise, but we kind of used most of the history because if it's only 3 or 4 messages anyway, you might as well just include everything. We of course recorded the conversation so that we could go back and analyze what was discussed to understand how do people use this tool to inform the next version of it. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Benjamin Belmudez Biering. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's give him a hand.